breaking barriers and bridging the gaps between patients and doctors. Welcome to Brainstorming with the Docs and your co-hosts, Dr. Glenn Harrison and Dr. Kolby Condos.
All right, everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. We're back like we never left, huh, buddy?
Yes,
I'm Dr. Kolby Condos, Dr. Glenn Harrison with me again.
There we are. And this topic is kind of out there, but it's very, very important. There's deeper layers to this disorder.
Well, I think that this is one that's maybe underrated, but definitely very important, because not only can it be associated with like deeper causes, but also can impact people's psyches, their mental well-being, their relationships. So today we are going to talk about erectile dysfunction.
Right.
All I have to say about this is it must be like more prevalent than we know, because do you remember maybe it was like 10 years ago we all heard about like Smiling Bob? Remember that Enzyte commercial? That's every time we talk, like this comes up, that's all I can think of. This is Smiling Bob. This is Bob's wife.
That's true, but it is an indicator, or can be an indicator of something bigger.
Oh, absolutely. So starting off, if this is your first time watching or listening, this is not our typical topic, but we hope you enjoy it. But hit like and subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're going to continue to roll out new content. So let's start off this thing by shouting some statistics. I'm going to let you just get right after it.
Yeah, well, it's highly age dependent. Not everybody is not all men are dealing with erectile dysfunction, but it definitely goes up. So some of the numbers we saw here is complete erectile dysfunction rises from approximately 22% at the age of 40 and 49% by the age of 70. So almost 50% of 70-year-olds are dealing with complete erectile dysfunction. Not even.
And a quarter of all males up to the age of 40.
That's right. And it's common in younger men, of course, but it still affects 5 to 10% of men below the age of 40. That's from Boston University. It's not isolated to the U.S. The U.S. has, the highest rates of ED, 22%. Spain has the lowest rates, 10%. So that's a big difference, right? Just between two countries. And this is as of 2004.
It goes from 1 in every 4 to 1 in 10.
That's right. So, what is the common denominator, right? What is the common denominator? Well, there's a few, right? So there's a few reasons. There's a lot of things. I think the biggest thing is it can be the indicator of other cardiovascular issues, because penis is just a column of blood that the nervous system says go there, fill up with blood, and if there isn't proper and effective and highly functional cardiovascular health, just not going to have blood going where it needs to go when it's asked to go there. So, what's going on with the vasculature? I think that's the
that's blood pressure, blood flow, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. So
funny, because Viagra was actually a blood pressure medication.
Yeah.
When it first and then they actually noticed that erections were like a complication, a side effect. And they're like, ooh, happy mistake here, right? We can make way more money off of this.
Testing blood pressure, and then there's something else to talk about, right?
Yeah. Right. Something else popped up. I don't know. But there's more issues too, rather than just like cardiovascular. And these, you'll know the cause of these generally. As a generalization, not always maybe, but you can have injuries to your spinal cord. You can have injuries to your brain. You can have pelvic trauma. So you shatter your pelvis and you have the inability to get an erection. I mean, that would make sense. I think that one that maybe we actually did a podcast about this not too long ago. But like even things like neuropathy, so loss of sensation in that area can maybe contribute to that. You could have spinal cord injury. I just talked about that. Anything metabolically that affects blood flow, not just like cardiovascular disease, but also the things that contribute to cardiovascular disease can also impact this stuff. So things like smoking, like kind of a big deal. Maybe if you're having a hard time getting an erection and you're a smoker, might be a good place to start.
That's right.
things like hypertension, we already talked about, Viagra being a blood pressure medication, cholesterol, diabetes. Obviously, diabetes is going to affect not only the vasculature, but also what we just talked about with like the neurogenic pain and neuropathy. Um, am I missing anything?
Well, there's correlations with central weight gain and obesity. There's a big component of that, and ED, whatever the causes are. But there's, we went through the neurological causes, the metabolic causes, which drastically affected by lifestyle.
Yes.
That's
And I think that if you were to look at it statistically, I would say statistically, more often than not, it's not neurological.
Mhm.
To start.
Oh, yeah.
It might end up that way because of some other things, but I would say like metabolically, more often than not, it has to do with that.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And some of the strategies, well, and anything that can improve cardiovascular health will improve, any will have the opportunity to prove any erectile difficulties. Focusing on cardiovascular health would be the way. And what is that? Well, introducing any kind of cardiometabolic, lifestyle efforts, physical activity, 30 minutes a day. That's a big one. If you're a diabetic or pre-diabetic, fix it. Whatever it takes, fix it. We've done podcasts on diabetes. Stress management is another one. So that's really turning into a psycho-neural input, right? So
psychovisceral, psychosomatic.
Yeah, enough stress response shuts down neurological input into any kind of reproductive organs. So then your brain isn't allowing for blood flow to the periphery.
Yeah. And you think about the interesting thing about getting an erection neurologically is there's your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomics is always how you kind of basically the way I can explain it is it helps to tell you like where you should push blood. Should it push it to your gut? Should it push it to your muscles? Should it push it to your brain? Where should it push it? Mm-hmm. And getting an erection is kind of this interesting process where it actually is kind of a balancing act between the two different halves, the sympathetic versus parasympathetic, because you have to use both.
Yeah.
So if you start having issues with like not, sensation or with, even having things like diabetes where it's going to start to affect those neurons and those nerves, then yeah, I mean, you think about how difficult it is to coordinate all that when everything's perfect. You start throwing in different variables and it gets a lot harder.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, so stress management, management.
Yeah.
Whatever that is for each individual, but don't underestimate the effects of stress on the ability to attain an erection or maintain erection.
Yep.
Alcohol's another major player. I don't really understand the mechanisms of alcohol, how it plays into it, unless it's a blood sugar issue or a vascular issue, right? Is it maybe it's just a lifestyle piece like smoking? I don't know.
You could probably make the argument for both or either.
Yeah.
Either or both, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And then sleep quality. Yeah, interesting thing. We were talking about this in our testosterone episode. Testosterone levels drop by 20% when we're sleeping only 6 to 7 hours per night.
Yeah, versus 8. So that one extra hour.
It's
heat production by 20%. Crazy.
And then maybe just to go on a little bit of a tangent here, erections aren't all about testosterone. I know a lot of people I've had in my clinic where they're on like all sorts of testosterone therapies. It changed nothing in their sex life, changed nothing at all. So I think we kind of got to get out of the marketing brainwashing of, if there's reduced sexual performance, you just got to go on testosterone therapy. No, it's much more complicated than that.
Way more complicated.
Yeah.
Everything works together.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise. We're all connected, right? So then there's, so those are some lifestyle strategies. Then there's the nutraceutical strategy. And of course, there's times and places for these things. I don't think they're a silver bullet, but there's some really interesting, nutraceuticals out there. There's increasing nitric oxide species, and that's a vasodilator. Yep. So it's not going to kind of create an erection out of nowhere, but it does increase blood flow by dilating arteries. Everywhere in the body. There's a great product. We'll put a link in the description. A nitric balance by Apex Energetics. That's a really, really great product. And then there's L-citrulline. That is also another vasodilator, just in a different way, through enhancing nitric oxide species. And that's there's a product called Citronox by Orthomolecular. That's a really, really great one. And then there's DHEA, and DHEA. I use DHEA in my office quite a bit to enhance testosterone. So that's a natural way to drive up testosterone. And then there's the ones that have been around for a long time, horny goatweed. You can get that kind of all over, and maca root. So these are all kind of, and there's other ones, but these are some of the ones I know that we both use in our clinics to try to promote blood flow. We're not necessarily just using it for ED, but cardiovascular concerns. That's usually where I see it. Is there anything else that you can think of?
No, I think that the ones that I really like, that I've used more, I guess really like is kind of a bad way of saying it, but the ones that I'm really familiar with and I use a little bit more often, I definitely use the nitric balance with the nitric oxide, balancing the nitric oxide. Things like vinpocetine and huperzine. Those are both really effective.
Yeah.
There is one thing I wanted to talk about, because I don't actually think we did. If you're suffering from erectile dysfunction or ED, what do? Right? Maybe get some baseline testing, right?
Yeah.
Just investigate it, because you don't just stop having an erection for a reason. And we kind of always harp on this, like with whatever condition you have, investigate it and figure out what the problem is, right?
And don't just fall into, I got a testosterone problem, I need to go on testosterone, because you could be missing early signs, early risks of signs, risk for heart attack or stroke or any of these really, really serious disorders. So don't just run to that pathway. And if you look at both sides of the aisle, the pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical models, lifestyle, you will improve.
Right. And say you actually do need testosterone, right? How do you know how much unless you do the labs?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've had people that are like, well, I'm on T. Like, well, how much? They're like, well, they're just kind of upping it. And I'm like, well, what were you at? And they're like, well, they didn't. What do you mean? Where was I at? It's like, well, what were your levels? Oh, I don't know. They didn't run any. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's right.
Like, so investigation, right? Don't just take it as it's the normal. Even though it is kind of the normal in the US, it shouldn't be.
Yeah. And I know we're kind of harping on this, but all it takes is a male to not be able to sexually perform once, and there can be a psychological block there. So pay attention to these things as well. That there isn't a psychosomatic or visceral response. That it isn't stress that's doing it, form of anxiety.
So, well, I think that kind of wraps everything up for this week. If you guys got value out of this content, I mean, this is not our usual topic, but do our best to cover things.
Maybe it will be in the future.
Yeah, we do our best to cover what we got for questions or things that we've seen in clinic. Again, hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications, because we're going to continue to roll out new content regularly. Again, we'll put a link to the things that we talked about in the description. And if you guys have any questions, you can get a hold of us at info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com. You can get on our websites. Mine is northlakeschiropractic.com. Dr. Glenn's is drgharrison.com. Leave a comment, and we'll get back to you. We'll do our absolute best. So, anything else? You got anything?
That's it. I think that's all we got.
Well, I'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.